I think we're ready to call the meeting to order here. And so I guess first order of business is to approve the minutes from the October 19th meeting.
I move that we approve October 19th minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so let's, I'm super excited about the topic, so turn it over to folks.
Yeah, I'll just give a little intro and then get it over to Amy and Laura. But one thing I just wanted to give Director Bailey a little bit of credit for here is kind of the folks you see sitting behind you here. You know, it wasn't that long ago that as a district we really didn't have a team supporting this work, and so I think a big a lot of credit goes to Laura and how she's envisioned her team and how we can actually support this work as a district and having the capacity to be able to move some good work forward in these different areas. And so this team is great. They just spent the last hour or two with all of our administrators working on some of this very work. We always have admin council on Tuesday afternoons, and so that's why we were joking ahead of time that we just saw each other, but this time actually in person because we were just all via Zoom together here for the last couple hours. So big kudos to them and their team for the work they're trying to lead, and I think that's something that is easy to take for granted from the outside about how do you do all of these things and how do they move in a large organization like ours. And it's really a pretty rapid change when you think about how far we've come over the last few years and the people supporting that work. And so just some perspective sharing there, but otherwise I'll turn it over to Amy to kind of introduce the topic and get us rolling.
Yeah, thanks Matt for that background. And in addition to Laura and her team, Kate Callahan and Laura Gray are here tonight too to share components. So just to back up a little bit, but you know, last year we took on a big task and a big endeavor with pulling together that stakeholder group, PBIS, and rethinking school discipline work group. And as we convened that team and we were trying to work on behavior supports from a multifaceted approach, and we came out with a series of next steps. And tonight we're going to try to give a high-level overview of some of the important work that's going on in each of their departments. It was a nice segue because Charlie had been asking for some behavior data, and we're prepared to share that with you as far as the data that we have since the beginning of this school year. So lots and lots of work. I think the convergence of also having a new student information system, Infinite Campus, led to the necessity of some of this work getting done. But we're really proud of just what we can put in front of you tonight and what we've worked through. It has been a heavy, heavy lift, but I think ultimately all to the benefit, eventually, or even now so, to our staff and then ultimately to the students. You know, we're only as good as the data that we have access to and is in front of us. And tonight we're going to try to share or paint the story of all that's occurred, I would say, about over the last 6 to 8 months or so. We're just going to share that tonight. So without saying much more, our hope then is to share two different charts with you. One that we call a district event summary, and another that we call the district resolution summary. And we'll have Allison kind of walk through what that data is and what some of the terms that you see in front of you, what that means. And then just to, again, our bigger SEDH work, Laura will come back and share some more pointed things around social emotional learning and how we're supporting that and the work that we've done the last few months. Kate will talk about care assessment, that new process, give a little historical context, share where we're at with the rollout, and then Laura will wrap it up with restorative practices and justice and what's happened over the last few months. I think I need to go up here next and click on a document then. So if you have your computers, you're welcome to get into the document as well, but these are the data points that we want to share tonight, both district event summary and resolution summary, and they are linked here. And I'll let Allison talk to you about what you see represented here.
Okay. So this is Allison Freitag. She's our PBIS facilitator for the district in K-12. And so when Matt was mentioning the infrastructure of our team and just building it over time, this is her fourth year in this role. So just to put some perspective so fourth year that we've had someone specifically devoted to this type of work.
Thanks, Laura. Nice to see you all this afternoon. Amy, I think I might actually have you go back to just that overview slide really quick, and then I'll come into this one. I think just having the context might be helpful. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay. So when we talk about our district behavior data. There are a lot of different moving parts here, right? But one thing that we've had to work really hard with our building leadership teams centered around is just a change in terminology, right? Because we did embark on using a new student information system. So we transitioned from Power School to Infinite Campus, as you all are aware of, I'm sure, over the summer. And some of the terminology that we've previously used has shifted a little bit, and I think it's just important to set the context for what used to be terms that we've used in the current terms. So when we look at the total events, we often use Office Discipline Referral, or ODRs, and many of you are probably familiar with that terminology. So within Infinite Campus, we classify ODRs as events, okay? So if we look at our total district-wide data, this is from the first day of school through November 4th, our total events are 2,728. Now, those primarily are major events, right? Though there's a little bit of a caveat to that, which I'll share in a moment. Coded means that a building administrator has attached whatever has been submitted by a teacher or a staff within the building, because all staff have access to submit this directly, which is a step in the right direction, right? Because it's individual teacher who experienced that event, right, with the student is able to enter directly into our student information system. So when teachers do that, the only option they have is teacher or staff referral. It's not attached to our state Department of Education problem behavior codes. There are 33 of those to choose from, okay? That was intentional on our setup because we want to make sure that in using our new student information system, we are keeping our data clean and as tight as possible, right? So we have the ability to train our building administrators and leadership teams. That's a much smaller group of people, right, than all district staff. So when teachers go in and they have, experienced a behavior event with a student, they are able to enter all the information in, and it is just attached to a teacher or staff referral. As an administrator, and at that time when it's a teacher staff referral, it's classified as uncoded, okay? So we have 1,083 events that are currently uncoded of that 2,728. The coded means that as an administrator or a member of our building leadership team, I have reviewed that teacher or staff referral and I have attached it to one of our state reporting codes, one of those 33. Make sense so far? It's been a learning curve, right, for everybody within the building, just because it's a different way of approaching this work. So with the resolutions, resolution, of course, is, according to the State Department of Ed, referred to as action taken. Within Infinite Campus, our new student information system, they use the terminology resolution. So within resolutions, there are multiple options. Again, these are all tied to state reported categories. And of the total resolutions, we have 1,400 that have not resulted in suspension, whereas 199 have resulted in suspension, whether that be in or out of school. You'll also notice there are unresolved events, and that means they have been entered into the system, though they haven't been completed out by the administrator. So they're kind of still considered pending, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Make sense? The other terminology that you might see or hear is response. So for building administrators, this was kind of confusing, right? Because we have our events, we understand that piece, then we have resolution and we have response as other options within the system. Response within Infinite Campus refers to any instance of seclusion and or restraint. Okay, so that's just another terminology piece. All right, Amy, you want to go to the other piece? Oh yeah, did you have a question, Chad?
So for this method of classifying events, does every event result in a student being removed from the classroom for some period of time?
That's a great question. No.
So I'm saying one shaking no.
Definitely not. Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely not. Our goal in any situation is that teachers are equipped to handle a lot of this. So we often refer to classroom managed versus office managed, right? And our goal is to equip teachers with the skills and the knowledge and the understanding to be able to use a continuum of responses within their classroom setting, so students aren't even ever out of an instructional opportunity. It may not always happen, but no, this does not equal out of instructional opportunity or out of class time or anything like
So
that.
how am I going to know whether the out of instructional opportunity numbers are different in the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, so that's another component of the data. I don't think that we have that to share today, right? Is it within? I don't think it's within here. Though you would be able to look at when response is used, a behavior response. So remember I said resolution and then response is seclusion and or restraint. There are minutes attached within the Chapter 103 guidance that would note the minutes. So it would require somebody from the technology department pulling that information, but it would be there, I believe. Amy and Matt, I'm sure, could speak more to that.
Well, I think that's just probably a different level than what we've looked at before, Charlie. Like, it's pretty typical to think about suspensions resulting in that, of course, out of instruction time, but I think you're teasing that out even another layer, right? That even when we get a referral, how much instructional time is missed. And so Allison's talking about our theory behind trying to keep them in front of instruction as much as possible, but of course, if they're removed to the office or something that way, they're missing instruction too. So we could do some work on that to see how we could try to paint a better picture around that and what kind of documentation we have on the referrals as far as, you know, is there a removed from class or, you know, some to that component that could speak to a percentage of them that identifies, you know, missed instructional opportunities with this referral.
You know, it's great that we're trying to limit missing instructional time. That's certainly a great thing. But I still need, I think, we need to be able to compare how we're doing now with what we've done in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that comparison will probably be difficult though, because I think we could probably start tracking that data or getting a better sense of what we have, and Amy might have something to add here, but I think I can confidently say in the past we wouldn't have that data about missed instructional class period time or something to that effect. I don't think that data would probably be viable for us to look at in a comparison sense. But if that's something we want to, and I would agree with you, I think something we want to continue looking at moving forward, that should be something we make sure we can track now.
Well, I'm thinking, Matt, that the public's going to, the community's going to ask us about that.
And I think on the proactive side of things, stop me if I'm talking too much, but I think on the proactive side of things, we hope that buildings are looking at students who might not be in class for other reasons, right? Maybe they're going to visit the student family advocate, the school counselor, the nurse, etc. And so how can we maybe monitor that on the proactive end, because then we can look at a convergence of data sources and see a need that we might not capture elsewhere. So our behavior data is going to give us those it's going to present the externalizing behaviors, right? We're going to be able to capture and respond appropriately for additional student supports in that area. And other things like screening tools or perhaps capturing out of class time that students seek out, right, could help us on capturing the internalizing behaviors. So that's another piece that our team is really working on when we think about access to interventions. And that goes down a whole nother road, right? But it's definitely something that comes up regularly when we're discussing ways to better support students.
I think the other thing I would add, just real quick, and then Laura, you can go, is remember the DE defines for us those 33 problem behaviors, and so that's going to be on this sheet that you see. The other thing that they do is generate that list of what we formerly called actions taken. It's now called response.
Resolutions.
Resolutions. And within that, a building principal could code that they did several things for one event. So even if we went back to look at that list, Charlie, we couldn't ascertain how well we could. I mean, it would take a lot of guessing. We'd have to ask Austin. Digging deep in our data to understand, you know, that one event really elicited 4 responses from the building admin. We haven't encouraged just one response necessarily.
And that's why you're likely not going to see the total resolutions and the total event numbers, even once everything is coded, match up. Because an event could have multiple, like Amy said, multiple different resolutions.
Charlie, if you are curious if there is a feature that when a behavioral event occurs, that there's a drop-down menu, loss of instructional time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, or something like that. That currently that's not a feature in the Infinite Campus system. It also was not a feature in Power School, so I don't know if that's a feature that can be added. Does that because is that kind of what you're curious? Because in my mind, thinking of all the other data that we disaggregate and can pull, it has to be a piece of the data entry process in order to
really get it,
yeah.
Well, sure, I mean, I'm gonna support what you're doing.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this change, okay? I'm
If
just
you want
thinking
quantitative
that,
data
well,
is what I'm saying.
just thinking that,
Yeah.
when I've looked at office referral numbers for the last number of years, I've always assumed that one office referral is a student removed from instructional time.
Yeah, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, not necessarily.
That has not necessarily been the case, is
Yeah.
what you're
Correct.
saying, right?
It has more to do with the level of intensity of the behavior, whether or not it necessitates a temporary short removal from instruction where there is a continuum of response strategy used, and the student's able to get back to learning right away. Or if it is, I think that's where the terminology office referral is kind of an old term that, I mean, you would think that, yeah, that means that they're in the office, but that's not necessarily what happens. So that's a really good distinction and clarification.
Okay,
So then looking at the data sheet there,
yeah. So,
this afternoon, Allison walked the principals through their own set of information specific to their building, and so this is representative of all of the district during that time frame.
and so part of the work of each building's PBIS Tier 1 team, and this is a past practice, right, and current practice, but we look at what we refer to as the Big Five reports, and so we take a look at our office discipline referral data monthly typically, right? Today we're showing you August 23rd through November 4th at the district level, but as a building, we would go in and we would look at that typically monthly and look for a variety of different pieces. So if you start at the upper left, that'll just give you the dates. Below there, it's reiterating again what I shared on that summary slide, the number of coded events and the number of uncoded. For the event type, so moving to the right, you'll see the green event type. There are 33 event types, of course, that the Department of Education uses. We are not able to change the terminology used on any of those. So that is not our language, that's the Department of Ed. And sometimes we wish that we could modify that language a bit because we don't really love it, right? Though we don't have, the ability to do that as of right now. But if you look again at district-wide data, our top two so far this year event types have been physical aggression without injury. You'll see behind that major in parentheses. Some behaviors, the state defines a minor, so a lower intensity, lower level behavior, and a major behavior. So anytime you see major in parentheses, that means there's also a minor alongside of that. If you don't see that in parentheses, there is no minor, okay? So the second most common event type is defiance, insubordination, or noncompliance. So those are our top two currently when we look at district-wide data. Now what we would ask the building teams to do, and if I'm going into too much detail, Amy or Laura and Matt, stop me. What we would ask our buildings to do is take a look at what are the most frequent problem behaviors and what instructional opportunities can we provide centered around those. So how can we teach or reteach our expectations specific to the most frequent problem behaviors or event types. We also have building teams look at the time of day. You're going to see that on the top right in green. And you'll see there's hour segments within the day. And you'll notice that a majority of the office discipline referrals occur kind of during that noon hour, right? So around our lunch, elementary age, lunch recess, etc. If you scroll down a little bit, I'll come back to that top left one. You'll see left to right here, location. Location is one that we look at. So you'll see that, a majority, well over 50%, come from the classroom. okay? So it makes sense. Students are in the classroom a majority of their day. And then on the right-hand side, it's breaking it down by grade. And we've been able to monitor trends here. So we know typically that we see kindergarten have quite a few office discipline referrals. That's their first experience typically at school, right? And you'll notice a trend right now is K-1-2 having higher numbers. And just thinking about their school experience over the last couple of years, right? We know that there's opportunities for reteaching there. So again, we would charge the buildings with taking into consideration location, time of day, grade level. How can we target our approach to, maybe we just need to focus on our lower grades. Maybe we need to focus on a specific grade. And so we would encourage them to reteach centered around that. Let's down lower. Okay, let's go back up to that other CSIP one, Amy, on the upper left. So here you'll see on the left-hand side, number of major events by CSIP subgroup. So this just breaks down by FRL, ELL, IEP, and race ethnicity. And the reason that this is broken out by CSIP subgroup, and Christy, you're gonna have to chime in here and help me, but we take a look at students with 5 or more major office discipline referrals, right? And then we look at broken down by CSIP subgroup. Did I get that right?
Yes, these are the straight numbers, but on the resolution tab, we look at percentage. So we look at out of the percentage of students that are FRL, what percentage of those students have more frequent or chronic problem behavior? And so then we can really compare apples to apples and look at, are we seeing students with more frequent or chronic problem behavior that fall into any of these subgroups? And then we can look systemically and address some of the issues that might be related to that.
So on the building reports, they would have another little category here, and they would look for that the percentage. This is just straight numbers. So if FRL 1,265 events are attached to a student who receives free and reduced lunch, falls into that category. So that's the first sheet. That's the district event summary. The next sheet that we will show you is the district resolution summary. So again, event is the problem behavior. Resolution is as a result of that particular behavior, what do we do within the building, right? And this is again district-wide data. So you'll see the total number of behavior events. I shared that on that summary slide, as well as the ones that have not had a resolution attached to them yet. You will see the breakdown that resulted in suspension and the attachment to, again, those CSIP subgroups. And then you'll see the breakdown below in that green header of those having a resolution other than a suspension. So our goal, of course, is to keep students in their instructional opportunity as much as possible and think of alternative resolutions beyond suspension, right, when at all possible. So hopefully that helps give a little breakdown of the data. Anything I missed?
We'll just add that a big thanks to the tech department in Austin who helped create this spreadsheet to extract all the information from Infinite Campus, because Infinite Campus itself doesn't make it super pretty and useful, easily useful. And once we roll out Tableau, in the district, we'll have visuals that are actually more digestible and readily available for ourselves as well as district teams to kind of absorb that information in. I mean, that's laid out really well, but it'll be even new and improved with Tableau. Any questions on that before we move on? So thank you, Allison, that was really great. And also Christy Miller, she is our behavior strategist. So you heard her chime in as well. And then I may as well take an opportunity to introduce Lindsay Schleckebeer. She is our .8 school counseling coordinator. So this is the first year that she used to be just .2 up until this year for the school counseling coordination. So that's .8 of her position. And then the other .2 is health curriculum coordinator as well. And then Corinne Frank is our learning supports coordinator as well. So this is our SEBH team right here. And thank you, Matt, for what you said at the beginning. Sometimes we forget that just a few years ago, it was just Corrine and I. And over time, we've been able to kind of, not necessarily add positions, but just reuse or repurpose some of the FTE within the district. And so we appreciate that acknowledgement and all the work that everybody in our district does to support social, emotional, behavioral health. So it definitely takes a village, and it isn't just us, but we appreciate that. And also, so thanks to Mr. Pissark for hosting us today. Yep. All right. All right, so then Allison did a great job of just walking you through the data that we have available to us through Infinite Campus. I do want to stress that that big 5 that she walked you through just to disaggregate the data on a monthly basis, that is not new. That, when I was a principal at Wickham and I was learning about PBIS years ago, that big 5 data analysis process, that's been in place for a really long time. So, you know, buildings have been implementing that in implementing long-term action plans based upon that from year to year, as well as just on a month-by-month basis. Where are we seeing, you know, the behaviors, getting to the root of the cause is always the issue. What are we going to do in a proactive and supportive way so that we always aren't just reacting to it? But that student information system rollout with Infinite Campus gave an opportunity to really try to align everything together and gave us a chance to really create a one-stop shop, is kind of what Amy keeps calling it, that we've put our office referral process, of course, it's an Infinite Campus, but, and that contains the bullying and harassment because that's part of the office referral or behavioral event process. Care assessment, which, you know, Kate, of course, will talk about later, but that documentation is embedded within Infinite Campus as well. And the Chapter 103 is now part of Infinite Campus, whereas that used to be a different place that schools would document that. And then Senate File 2360. So trying to make our system efficient, as efficient as possible. We're really trying to take the opportunity with a new student information system to make it be as clear and as effective and efficient as possible for the buildings. One of the other improvements that we are still working on that will be a huge help is creating a new district list of major and minor behaviors. So in the past, the way that our PBIS has been taught to our building teams over the years is for each building to create their own list of what constitutes a minor behavior, what constitutes a major behavior, kind of what's that threshold. And through the course last year of the Rethinking Discipline PBIS work group, we recognized that more consistency would be beneficial across the district to address disproportionality, to be more equitable, to have more consistent responses for students. And so we started a process last spring where we collected each building's minor and major charts, synthesized those. We partnered with our Grantwood AEA PBIS trainers to assist us in that process, and got input from various departments. And our next steps are then to work with a small team of administrators and take the current draft back to the PBIS Rethinking School Discipline Work Group to just really vet it through a variety of different perspectives and stakeholders and before it's finalized. All of that, of course, is still aligned with the Iowa Department of Education's behaviors that Allison referred to at the beginning. It's a really long, though important process. And so just as of yesterday, we were talking about just the steps and the plans to bring that back to that work group and make sure that they have input and are able to provide feedback before it is rolled out, you know, and considered final for the rest of the district. Amy, is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
No, I think we'll go to the next slide and then maybe see if there's additions.
One piece too, in considering the minor major chart, we look at the tiered fidelity inventory as a measurement of our PBIS implementation efforts in each building as well as district-wide. And 2 features of that fidelity check every year come in low, right? And we've monitored this over time. And it's so exciting to be taking action on this because those 2 features are that the minor majors are clearly defined, right? And that there are clear policies and next steps centered around them. So it's really exciting for our team to be tackling this project and working alongside of the community work group as part of this, because it's something that we've noticed, right? And are now able to take next steps in solution, right?
And that's a good segue, Allison, to the other area that we have historically seen in our TFI and SAS data related to this is also the chart that you saw earlier, where there's more of our behavior events are occurring in the classroom. That's not just this year. So that would match the data that we look at from year to year, where the classroom-based location is the highest frequency of where behaviors are reported from. And so therefore, this year, I said earlier this afternoon in an administrative meeting, kind of following the coattails of the equity department and the great PD that they have been pushing out and started last year with a variety of topics, but culturally responsive teaching and incorporating the importance of social emotional learning into that. I got to be kind of a guest every once in a while, Laura's PD last year. What we are then transitioning to starting in December is a series of 5 different all-district Thursday PDs focusing on the importance of building strong relationships with students and providing content and information and practical strategies about evidence-based and culturally responsive classroom practices and integrating social emotional learning for students and adults. And we gave this afternoon the secondary principals a little high-level overview, and last week at the elementary principal IDS meeting, we also provided that same high-level overview of the content to that group, so that they can kind of be prepared and know what's coming in the upcoming PD and what they can do to set their staff up for success. That's taken, as many of you know, providing and planning and creating professional development takes a lot of hours, but we're really excited about it. The team's been working on it, connecting with Laura and people in her department to have some alignment between the culturally responsive teaching, the restorative practices that are classroom-based as well. So, I don't know, we're really excited about that. I don't know what else to say, but.
Well, the thing I liked about it today, Laura, if I just jump in, was some of the intentionality around the work with it. It's like, I think a lot of times we talk about building relationships with kids is obviously a major factor in what we need to do to help prevent disciplinary situations, but that everybody's skill set and their ability to do that is in a different place, right? And so I think a lot of what I saw them talk about today was, okay, well, how do you do that, right? And it's almost like the elephant in the room about how do you build relationships with kids? How's that always look like? And that could be different for a first-year teacher that's 22 and for the 62-year-old teacher in the classroom, right? They're going to have to use different skills to potentially be able to do that and draw on some of their different strengths. So I think that was a good part where it's almost like we say build relationships, but actually getting into the nitty-gritty about how do you do that, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. There was a little video that, just a short little segment that's very powerful that we showed, and there's one little phrase that every time I watch it says, building relationships is more than being nice to kids. Like, there's more to it than that. And so, and there's a lot more to it than, in that video, but that's just a really good, kind of builds upon what you're talking about, Matt. Was someone gonna say something back there?
Within the PD, we really try to model what we're asking of the teachers as well, right? So we really try to be very intentional about modeling some of these practices and then naming it in the moment, right? So it's not just something that we're doing, it's very intentional. And we were able to do that today with the administrators, right? And we see the comfort level. Some are used to that practice and some aren't. But the more we practice and the more we model, the more familiar it becomes, and then they take it back and use it in their buildings with their teachers, and the teachers are better equipped to use it in their classrooms with their students.
Another feature that we're intentionally trying to put in there is to have little video clips of teachers in action in the district, implementing social emotional learning in relationship building and classroom practices in a variety of ways. And so, we're saying, hey, we'll come out in video or send us a little clip or whatever so that we can really highlight the great work that so many of our practitioners are already doing every day.
Or can I add one quick thing?
Yep.
I think the other important thing is, you'll notice on here it says SEL for adults, and this team has done a tremendous job of making sure, Castle will train us that this is really a cornerstone of PBIS. It's ensuring that adults, SEL, we're hyper-focused on that as well. That would have come through during the IDS principal meetings last year, and it's continued as a theme this year. And I can tell you, even to the admin mentor and mentee meeting that we had ahead of our level and admin council meetings today, that was a theme that came out in the particular chapters that we were reading in Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. And so it is a focus for us. We know that coming through this pandemic, people are in different spots, and we're holding that just as high on the board for us to tackle that. Nancy Reistenberg, when Laura Gray and I reached out to her last spring about, what's the best method for us to bring restorative practices to the district, she said to us that day on the phone, make sure you're taking care of adult SEL as well, and that just needs to make sure that's part of your baseline activity. So how does that group for continuing to do that work as well?
Another big piece of just what we've rolled out recently with social emotional behavioral health work and improvements and trying to build the infrastructure across the district is the universal screening component. And this year we're continuing that. We started last year with 2nd grade through 8th grade, as you know, using the My Sabers tool. And this year we are continuing to use My Sabers just for the 2nd through 6th grade. And then we're implementing the Panorama SEL survey this winter, which would start shortly after winter break with grades 7 through 12, and walked through that with the secondary principals this afternoon as well. That helps us have student voice, because that is students responding to these questions. It's not the teacher rating their experience with the student. It's direct student voice, and the more we can hear directly from students, the better it informs us about what they're feeling and what their areas of strength and need are, as well as just what we can use to implement within our system and use that as another convergence of data source with, for example, the culture and climate survey, or some other surveys to see. So we just highlight the importance of that convergence of data sources, because when we think of universal screening, we could be talking, we want to look at attendance data, we want to even encourage teams to look at their health office data, their grades, in addition to the system of the behavior event / ODR data as well. We would never want to make any supports or services or determinations just solely based upon behavioral event data. And then we have a quick look at tools and resources that our team has rolled out. And Amy wants to say something.
Really quick, yeah, because I think this is really important, and I really loved how Christy categorized this at, I think it was the October elementary principal IDS meeting, but you want to talk about your comment with internalizing behaviors and external behaviors and our data points for that.
Yes, and so the language that we've used to, the office discipline referrals, and now we're calling them behavioral events, that I really appreciate, because ODRs, office discipline referrals, indicates that we're sending kids to the office, and that's not what we're doing. And I think teachers have a mindset of this is a response, and that we're maybe disciplining kids by tracking behavior this way, but really what we want to do is we just want to know how many behavioral events are occurring in our schools, so that we can look at over time, are the things we're doing having an impact on that, and also who are the kids that have the most behavioral events? How can we help them? How can we capture them? So our behavior events, or previously ODRs, is actually a screening data source for kids with externalizing behaviors. And at schools, part of their Big 5 reports that they look at every month, one of those pieces is which kids are having more than 3? Do we need to offer them more intervention and more support? How can we help these kids? Not how can we discipline them and come down on them? So it's really a screening data source for those externalizing behaviors. And then the mental health screeners, like My Savers and the Panorama screener, are more internalizing screeners. They're capturing kids that maybe aren't having behavior at school, but might be not showing up or might have more emotional reactions that they can report out on those screening data sources.
Thank you, Christy.
Yeah.
All right.
So the other doc that Amy's going to show us just a quick link to is just a sampling of the various little screenshots from some tools and resources that we've shared with the building administrators and the PBIS internal coaches, just to try to streamline everything, because we do have the new student information system that giving us the opportunity to put everything, kind of converge it all together instead of it maybe being in different places or having been built in pieces over time. And so just guidance on reminders for fidelity of data entry and just as simple as that, to defining some of those new terms of what we had been using related to Power School and what Infinite Campus refers to us as. Those blue links there are links to the different directions that have been sent out about how to document and use the system. Again, rolling all of the areas of documentation into Infinite Campus. Even an example of just a screenshot of that the directions that buildings receive about how to document a seclusion and restraint incident there. And then I think at the bottom is just little snippets of how we've put information together to help the buildings analyze their data. What does the uncoded mean, for example? What does the resolution mean? And just walking them through that. And that kind of yellow and red, some of that is an example of just a data analysis drill down process to figure out, well, what are our action steps to really hone in on whether it's the classroom location or the time of day or the breakdown of the demographic of students to address and try to be proactive and prevent that from happening in the future. I think that's it. Oh no, it's not. The last, how can I forget? The last one is just a little slice of the district minor and major chart that is in the works and in draft form currently, that we were just alluding to, that we need to vet this through some principals and then through that community work group, the Thinking Discipline and PBIS work group. So on the left side, the purple is all of the Department of Ed information, the code number, the name, the description, and then on the right are the minor and the major columns with examples.
So I just want to understand, because there's some draft forms throughout this. The whole thing is still in draft, and we haven't rolled it out to the teachers and staff yet and given them PD on it.
Not the minor and major chart.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's in the works
Yep.
and
Yep.
going to be implemented soon.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, thanks.
I think the thing that too, we should address and be just transparent about is where we've been with secondary officers' role, data entry versus elementary. Anyone on your team want to speak to that? You want me just to share?
Well,
Really where we've been?
just the data has shown us over time that there's way fewer office discipline referrals / behavior events that have been recorded at our junior highs and high schools comparatively to our elementary schools. So we are really trying to work on reframing that understanding that, again, it's a screening tool, it's information. It in our system shouldn't be seen as a gotcha. You know, we want to use that as an important piece of that convergence of data to make decisions. And so part of that is reteaching and reframing that database decision making is a big part of the multi-tiered system of supports, and that we don't want, it's a little bit of a conundrum because it's not like we're saying we want a bunch of behavioral events. It's just that we're really authentically documenting the information. The number of referrals probably don't match the typical day-to-day in like the size of our comprehensive high schools.
And I think, you know, if we're just being frank about it a little bit, like when I started at Southeast when we got here, it was a big effort about just reducing referrals, right? It was a lot about reducing referrals because we were writing too many referrals and we knew how discrepant and disproportionate those responses were. So there was a lot of this energy and pressure around reducing referrals. Well, I think what you hear Laura and the team saying here is referral doesn't necessarily mean consequence. Referral doesn't mean, you know, some of these other things we probably have attached to it. There's other reasons we want that information documented there. And so it's not like she did a nice job of articulating, it's not like we're asking to go out and like, let's have a bunch, right? But at the same time, like if something's there, we need to document, because if anything, hopefully what you took away from these first 5 slides is the depth of the work around behavior that there is. And we can't do the depth of that work if we don't know what's there. And so I think that's, honestly, that'll be a little bit of a hurdle with our secondary team as we continue to talk about it, because of just the straight push for so long about reducing referrals, right? But if we're really going to be honest about teaching behavior and helping kids improve their behavior and wherever they're deficient, we have to know the information, right? We have to know that. And so that's a little bit of a switch and a change that as we look at this more, we're going to have to work on.
And our goal, of course, is to provide the supports that students need, right? Whether that's additional layers of support in the form of interventions of some sort, right? But we need that data and multiple data sources to be able to tell us, okay, what is being provided universally isn't meeting that particular student's needs. What else can we offer?
So as we have a big reset as a system with, have an opportunity in front of us with Infinite Campus and kind of resetting the deck, you know, that we are likely to see these secondary office referrals in particular to be greater than we've seen in the past. I just want to give you all a heads up on that as we maybe do next year's annual progress report, right?
Another thing we added this year, you can't really add a whole lot to the Iowa Department of Education action taken / now it's called resolution, but they give you a little leeway. And so we did add a restorative response, restorative practice, I believe it was, Laura, the way we worded it in the drop-down menu of choices. So to be able to try to track that over time, you know, would be really important too, to know if that is a response, is it working to reduce the incident, or is that helping us get to the root of the issue? You know, is it, you know, because this isn't about trying to figure out what the issue with the student, it's trying to create an environment where the student can thrive and succeed. And so that's on us as adults to create that environment around them.
So I appreciate these points and clarification, and I think it makes sense that a referral doesn't mean, I think you said consequence, I think we traditionally think of it as discipline.
Right.
And so it's not bad that we have high referral numbers, but as a board, and I think this is to Charlie's point, we want to make sure that we're not having disproportionality in our discipline or our consequences. So if we can't rely on this data for that, what data will we or can we look at to look at that?
Well, you still can use the data, right? Because remember, if you go to the consequence, there is still a consequences data point, right? So there was still things there on suspensions or around some of those resolutions, right? Is the terminology we're using now. So you can still look at that resolutions part. I think that'll be the piece to tease out, is like, we'll still track what the consequences are and how many of those are there and how disproportionate those are. And so that's where Amy's saying that necessarily an uptick in referrals and documentation, you'll want to compare that to actual then resolutions of, okay, how are those events getting resolved? Because like Laura's saying, well, if we could do more restorative practice and then we're reducing suspensions at the same time as a consequence, then that's a success, right? But if we're doing a bunch of restorative practices and suspensions continue to go up, we have a disconnect there in what we're trying to do.
Are there other consequences than suspensions that we should be looking at or tracking? Or can we? Or is it just, you know, suspensions or everything else that happens?
Cleaning chalkboard erasers,
I
remember.
I think there are 19, I mean, I can't give you the specific number.
Yeah.
But for example, Saturday school is listed on the Department of Education resolution, right? They call it.
We would like to
taken,
ban that
right?
even being embedded within Infinite Campus, but because it's part of the Department of Ed's list of
So we
actions
could pull
taken.
from that list that they pre-generate, right, and then we could compare both
Mhm.
those different consequences out. And
Another
that's where
one
you're
is
saying
like-
we added the restorative one?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, they don't let you add a lot, but like loss of privilege is one. Conference with student is another. Contacted parent is one. I'm not gonna say it right, but like added this to the student's individual behavior plan. There's words like restitution in there.
There's a
you know.
number of them we could
Yeah.
look at to do some comparative.
Yeah, so that would be the further breakdown of the bottom of that chart of the resolutions.
And I think next time if we see this data again, it would be helpful to have that breakdowns. I think that'll give us a better understanding of what these resolutions look
Yep.
like.
And I would say about, when we're really drilling down to look at disproportionality, that we kind of glossed over it a little bit, we talked a little bit about it, but is that percentage of students with 5 or more ODRs in a year. And in the past, what that's shown us is, we might be able to say, okay, in these buildings, if you're a black student, you're twice as likely as a white student to receive chronic discipline referrals. And how can we support that building in addressing those issues? Or what's going on over there that's different in this school, where that number isn't different across racial minorities? So that piece of data really helps us look at that, but it's specifically at students who have more chronic behavior problems throughout the year.
So you used the phrase, how can we support that building? So it's just, is support for that building, does that include trying to figure out what's happening with the students?
Yes.
Does it also include trying to figure out what's happening with the staff?
Yes. That's a big part of our
And
job.
I would say what you just described kind of leads itself to Allison and my role. Allison is looking more at tier 1, what systems can we change for all students? My role is looking more at how can we support individual student behavior plans. So, yes.
So for example, Charlie, we had a I won't name the campus, but we had a series of emails about one campus, right? And some problems they were having with behavior. That's what that group went in and did, right? So Allison went in and looked at tier 1 systems, tried to think about, okay, what tier 1 systems do we have in place? What needs to be improved? What are the staff committed to? What have we gotten loose on? And then Christy would look at those additional interventions on top of that to see how they can commit. Because, you know, sometimes in education we get focused on just the interventions, right? Just trying to intervene our way out. But we really have to go in and look at that tier 1, 2, and that baseline level of what we're doing to teach around behavior. So that would be an example where they got put in motion and then to go to a building and try to provide that intense support.
Okay, thanks.
And a lot of that adult learning will be happening as well during these district PDs, which is why we're so excited to have access to the full district staff, to really circle back on. These are the basic, evidence-based, culturally responsive classroom practices that you can implement for all students, right? And we will see positive outcomes as a result. So that's really exciting.
That's our universal instruction, if you will. And then if, so we need to have some common language, teaching, information throughout our whole district of, just to try to provide some consistent PD around those really important topics.
And do we,
Go
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just wondering, so, for example, when, we've got people all over the scale on all of those, and then do we identify that and then get more specific training to folks who need more support?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what we want to.
Exactly what we do.
Yeah.
okay, that's the goal,
Yes,
but we're,
yes.
because I'm like, how do you figure out where folks are at?
Yeah.
Well, and
Well-
part of, sorry,
You go.
I was gonna say, part of how we do that, and what we've been really trying to be intentional about in our team is, sharing conversations we're having with buildings. Because a lot of times, those conversations overlap. So Allison is supporting PBIS, I'm supporting the counselors, I'm hearing themes, we're sharing, what we're hearing, what supports they need. And when we see themes, it helps us know, okay, like, this school needs some targeted PD around this, or we're seeing this theme across elementaries or even K-12. And that's kind of how we really designed our PD, was based on what we were hearing from buildings and kind of this back to basics approach that was needed. And the other thing we've been really intentional about, which I like, is part of the PD, and what we asked admin to help us out with is to make sure that learning is collaborative, that it's not just a sit and get, and that there are action steps, that there are goals set around the learning each time, and that there's follow-up on that, so that there's really, there's an action behind the learning, so it's not just, oh yeah, this is great, I'll do it, right? So they have to really think about where they're at and what they need.
It makes me think back to the surveys that we give the SAS and the TFI, and then from there, the buildings write their action plans based on that. So these folks have access to every building's action plan based on what they're seeing in the surveys, and staff take those surveys and give it their honest feedback. And then there's this other data, right, that we can check and watch at the district level. It's data like we shared tonight. It's my Sabre screening data. We can pull and see what does it look like across our 2nd through 6th graders, and that helps then drive, this work as well, so.
And data from our action plan process last spring, when we both had quantitative and qualitative data input from the buildings, was overwhelming that they wanted universal classroom practices PD. That was one of the choices that we said, what do you want to, what do you, based upon your data in your building, what you know about your building, of these 8 or 9 focus areas related to SEBH, what do you think is the most important? And universal classroom practices was the top, and systems was, I think, second.
That was one more thing I thought would be information that the board might want to know is where do these teams or where do these building administrators, where do they do this work each month? How do they get to this level of work that we provided a bunch of directions, we want them to analyze their data, where does that occur each month? Can you share that with the board? The PBIS tier.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
The PBIS.
So I would say PBIS tier 1 team.
So I think as an example,
I got you.
like our tier 2, tier 3 team, we just had a discussion last week about, some behaviors that we're seeing out of some certain individuals. Their frequency is a little bit higher than some of the other kids. And we had a pretty frank conversation about, we think the next step logically for us was to go back and take a look at that tier 1 at all of our classrooms and kind of do an assessment of where we're at, and make sure that those pieces are in place before we start to do too much of that tier 2 or tier 3 level. So, within our PBIS team meetings, whether it's at that tier 1 team or that tier 2, 3, that's where those conversations are happening. And I'm guessing that's where it's happening at a lot of buildings.
And I would say most buildings in the district would echo the same sentiments that Chris just shared, right? And so we know that we'll see a spike in behavior referrals this year. So when you all are looking at the behavior event data, it's going to be higher than past years, no question, right? And it's probably a couple reasons. Obviously, we're returning from multiple different learning modes over the past couple of years, and we're being really intentional about how we're asking building teams to enter the data. So just kind of contextually keep that in the back of your mind as you go throughout the year, because it will be higher for a variety of reasons, right? But that's not always a bad thing, because we can offer better support based around it.
Mm-hmm. Really quick question, when you're looking at resolutions for students with IEPs, is that a discussion that you bring their entire IEP team in on, or how is that handled? Is it handled the same with any infraction that a student has?
I think the answer to that is, Ruthina, it depends, right? And if we're talking about getting to the level of suspension, then we want to think about, is it manifestation of their behavior? But any of our students that are have behavior-focused goals, we're going to think about and treat and think about, how that implementation of the student's behavior intervention plan is going. So we always want to go back and ask ourselves, is there something we can do differently? Mm-hmm. The very first question we ask ourselves when it's an entitled individual who has a behavior plan is the plan being implemented with Fidelity? And that's just super critical and key. We've got, Lisa's department has processes and procedures behind that we ask all buildings to do behavior intervention plan implementation checks at least once a month on students. And then if students are struggling, we ask for those implementation checks on the behavior intervention plans to happen more than once a month. So that's kind of how we look at it that way, but that's a great question.
And I think all of what we're talking about here, and I know we probably need to move on to the other 2 topics, is the emphasis on the level of responsibility that it's on us as adults to create the environment for the student. This isn't about you know, what are we gonna do to shape or mold the student to our system? It's we've got to change our system so that we can provide that education for the students in a way that's gonna work for them. And so the contextualizing of looking at the data and the environment is about what do we need to change in our environment to help the student or the students. I just think that's really important and for us to remember. It isn't about, oh, here's the behavior data, what are we gonna do to change the student? It's more, what do we need to do to provide the supports that the student, the group of students or the individual student needs.
Any other questions for Laura or her team members as we transition to care assessment next?
It's the board's meeting, but maybe just time conscious on the next two parts, knowing we've already went an hour. I don't know. Like before when we did these, we always tried to keep them an hour, and we're already past the hour, so I don't know what your guys' thought is, but with Kate and Laura's part, maybe just try to be aware of the time, and if these guys have more questions, or JP, depending on how you want to go with it, we're certainly prepared to do whatever, but
Yeah,
we also want to respect that's kind of been our norm around ed committee, so.
True. Yeah, it is always hard with these topics to.
Yeah, it's hard to know,
Into
yeah.
an hour for sure.
All right, Kate is going to share where we've been, where we've come to as of today with care assessment.
All right. Well, I thank you for the opportunity to come today and share this information with you. I recently had surgery, so I'm trying to project my voice as best I can. If you can't hear me, please let me know. It's a little harder talking through masks. But at any rate, I wanted to give you an overview, kind of the historical perspective of where we've been with care assessment. But as I look around the table, I think many of you lived through this experience. I'll briefly outline it just to kind of take you back. You may recall back in 2018, the school board asked the administrative team to develop a safety committee. And we had a 15-member committee, and we spent about 10 months reviewing best practice and safety protocols, reviewing what we had in place in the district, and then making recommendations to the school board. So as a result of that, in the spring of 2019, the committee made 8 recommendations to the school board, and 7 of those were accepted, and care assessment was one of those. At that time, the superintendent directed the Student Services Department to write a grant to help launch care assessment. So that grant was written, and then it was also received in October of 2019. You may recall, once that grant was received, there were a lot of concerns within our community on what that might look like. So I think because one of the recommendations with the safety committee was to have more SROs in our building, a lot of people were concerned that care assessment was going to be this avenue for SROs to come within our schools. So there was concern in that area. Also, we were looking at how do we, as a part of care assessment, identify concerns, threats, either to self or others ahead of time, so that we could intercept. And part of that was monitoring some social media, and so that, of course, that was concerning, and also just data, how are we going to keep track of this information? So we spent as a community probably, I'd say maybe 6 months just kind of talking through those various issues. You'll remember various presentations that I think we solicited, like the U of I threat assessment team that spoke about it. We also had the police departments. They had opinions on that, and they even thought of how we could team together. And I just I'm bringing that up just to let you know that grant was written prior to all those community conversations. So the way that the grant was written is the way that we're actually implementing that grant. That has not changed. The idea was to implement care assessment using CSTAG, which is a Virginia model of care assessment, and that's what we have been working through. So in the spring of 2020 then, we were given that green light to move forward with care assessment. And then in June of that year, we brought on board our care assessment coordinator, Dustin Gehring, to assist us with that work. Since that time, I'll just kind of let you know the work that we've been doing. Starting in the summer of 2020, we really worked hard to help our community better understand care assessment. We looked at care assessment and we looked at the Virginia model through an equity lens. Spent some time looking at the types of questions that people are asked to make sure those questions were restorative and inclusive. And I think people felt pretty comfortable with actually the way the Virginia model, or CSTAG, was outlined. So actually looking at that, we didn't feel a need to tweak it at that time. Or I guess we haven't seen a need to tweak it at this time. So then looking at where we have been. So in late fall and spring of 2021, we actually started having our care assessment teams meet at the building levels, so at the secondary levels. And so we developed all of our care teams. Now at that time, we had limited training that was offered through Dewey Cornell because of COVID, because that's the same time COVID hit. So we were having our meetings on Zoom, and we were actually able to access modules. So we had module training that many of our administrators took part in, and we had UAY trained because they're one of our community partners. And then, and so we did our best to try to implement care assessment with the training that we had. I noticed, during that time, it looked a little different probably than it looks today, because we were on Zoom meetings and it was kind of that one avenue where you had your teams together and they could talk about all concerns that they were seeing, and they just didn't have that opportunity to do that. Often students were not in our buildings, so it may not have looked as much as like we see a threat as we are concerned about kids. Does UAY have any suggestions on what we can do, to help students and families at that time? So in the summer of 2021 then, we really worked to develop the system that would house information on care assessment. So the types of forms that are utilized, and then also how, whether or not we need to use, what I'm thinking of, like plans safety plans for students, if those need to be developed, housing those as well, but then also identifying care plans for kids, the interventions that we may utilize, and just finding a system in general for that. We linked it to Infinite Campus because it will allow us actually to pull data, demographic data on students. We can look at the academic achievement of students, look at the resolutions, whether or not police were involved, and so forth, and really be able to pull good data. It'll also allow us to determine whether, as principals are investigating different concerns, whether or not they were resolved as transient, meaning that they're not as concerning, we don't believe this is a threat that will be carried out, or if it is a substantive threat, which is more concerning, where we need to put more measures and supports in place. So we hope once everybody is more familiar with the system and able to really navigate that better, we will be able to pull some really helpful data for you. So in the September of 2021, then we trained all of our secondary teams on the CSTAG model, and you'll hear it referred to as a Virginia model or CSTAG model. So this included the administrators, the SFAs, counselors that are on teams, UAY, who is involved with our work, and we had 2 police departments that also joined us in those efforts. And in October of 2021, we trained all of our administrators on Securely 24/7. And Securely 24/7 is a software that's used as a web filtering system to detect troublesome online activity in the case of threats to oneself or threats to others. So our staff has also been trained in that system. We are now currently working on really streamlining the process so that there's clarity in roles, because like I said before, we kind of had this system in which we were just trying to get support to kids during COVID, and now we want to make sure everybody understands the process as it's intended, but and also their roles within that. So what I'll share with you, and I know in the best interest of time, I'll try to do my best to do this quickly, but oh, thanks. Well, maybe I'll give you a few more to go in that direction. There's that, and I'm going to give you these as well. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this flow chart. Well, there's a lot of information on this flow chart, but I think it's really helpful in walking people through the process. So when we're doing care assessment well, we're getting out in front of a concern. So we're identifying either students that are a threat to themselves or a threat to others. We're putting supports in place so that incident doesn't occur, right? But sometimes something does occur, and then you're following a process as well. But our goal is to get in front of it, and the way we do that is whether it's the Securely 24/7, which provides information, whether it's the Say Something campaign, or students learning to report concerns to a trusted adult. So those are some of the ways that we might get in front of it. If you look at this flow chart, I'll just try to walk you through it. When we become aware of a concern, you evaluate this. Is this a concern that's a threat to oneself, or is it a threat to others? If it's a threat to oneself, we already have a district process for that, and we'll funnel it through that process, and that's the potentially suicidal students. We have nurses that assist with that, SFAs that help kind of help ask the questions to better assess if a student is at risk, and school counselors. So we would follow that system. If we're concerned that there's a threat to others, and I know the writing is really small, but we have a lot on here. And what I would say is a threat to others is an expression or an intent to harm someone. This might be like a fight, could be an assault, could be harassment and bullying, any types of threats to kill somebody. It could be oral, it could be written, it could be behavioral. It may be communicated, or it may be something in which a kid is in possession of either a lookalike weapon or a weapon, right? And we would want to investigate those as well. If ever, and this is why we put this right at the top, if ever there's a time that a school is concerned about the safety of their students and staff, we wouldn't start following a threat assessment process. We may call police directly to make sure everybody is safe. Once we're sure everybody is safe, then we would go back up to step 1 of that process. So with step 1 of the process, what we do is evaluate a threat. And what we're trying to do is determine whether or not this is a transient threat. Can we classify it as that? We have a process that we walk through to do that. It involves, this is generally the principal that will interview students, interview witnesses that are involved, and basically they're trying to decide, is there a communication or an intent to harm someone, or a behavior suggesting an intent to harm? If the answer is no, then that it may just be an expression of anger, and then we no longer keep following that process. So if we can rule that out through the questioning, then we can say that this is a transient threat. If we move forward saying we're not sure, then the principal still continues into step 2 to resolve it as transient. So there's additional questions. Is this an expression of humor, rhetoric, anger, frustration that can be easily resolved as not a threat to harm? Is a person able to offer an explanation, apology? Is there remorse, and do they have any future intent? It's really, the questioning really helps you get to the thinking of the student at that point in time, and helps you to answer these questions. And then if you're able to answer those questions as you don't believe there's a threat based on that criteria, then you may be able to resolve it as transient. In those cases, you may still employ services. You may have students, meet with the school counselor and SFA. You may still have some classroom monitoring just to make sure things are safe. You may use restorative justice, conflict resolution, mediation. And there may be discipline imposed just depending on the situation. And the one thing I'd just like to mention is care assessment is not involved in school discipline. They're assessing a threat, the likelihood that it will be carried out, and helping to prevent additional violence. So then, if we move forward, we think that a threat may be substantive. Now these are in 2 categories of serious or very serious. Serious means a threat to fight, assault, or continued harassment. Very serious is a threat to kill, sexually assault, cause very serious injury with a weapon, or commit arson. In these cases, and again, sometimes, these are ones that we're very concerned about. Sometimes they can be resolved as transient because of the serious nature of it. We're not sure what to think at that time. We may need to either develop a case plan or a safety plan as a part of that process, but we also may put in other measures. It may warrant more information. So like in that very serious, like the threat to kill or so forth, or a threat of sexual assault, it may move into that very serious category in which we need more information. At that time, we would consult our police liaisons for additional information. We can offer mental health evaluations through UAY, and I would say that that's been very helpful, because if we're not sure, it's kind of hard to know what a student is thinking and what their intent is. UAY can do that mental health assessment, and the turnaround time is 5 days or so. And traditionally, when we had concerns that are at that very serious level, the district, you always have to take everything so seriously. We're not sure what might happen. So we may have traditionally had to keep students out of school until they had a health professional say, oh, you are not a threat, or you do not pose a threat. That could keep a kid out of school a while, because they may not have a connection to a healthcare provider that feels comfortable making that recommendation or that assessment, and it could take 6 weeks to a few months for somebody to feel comfortable making that determination. But UAY can do that within 5 days to give us more information about a student's thinking. If we do believe we have a substantive threat and that we do need to put procedures in place to stop that threat, then we do so. But then also, we may need to continue to monitor that particular student, put safety plans in place, and then we have that care assessment team that reviews those plans monthly. So that is just a quick overview, and I'm not sure if I really did credence to explaining that well. So please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask those.
Kate, I know we have the rules on there, but I'm wondering if we just maybe.
Just go right through roles?
Well, maybe I just wonder if we want to just take some question and not touch upon the rules tonight, and if
Oh.
we could,
Mhm.
look at that on their own. What questions might you have for Kate?
That was a lot of information. I feel like I just went.
It's a ton, yeah, and obviously we try and consider it too, but do folks have any specific questions on this?
Do we anticipate reapplying for grant funding to continue to support Dustin's position, or
We
is
did
that not an
apply
option?
for one grant, and we did not receive that. I think it's because we had it off the ground and they were looking to support new initiatives. We can always apply for grants, if there's a grant still available for that particular cause. Yeah, absolutely.
So very briefly, the role of the uniformed police officers in this plan here only occurs in, I'm trying to read this very quickly.
Yes.
Step 2 or 3, is that right?
Well, it's actually in step 4.
4, okay.
So those very serious substantive threats.
And the role of the officers supposedly at that point is evaluation and helping in
Well, they may,
students' intent
right.
and their capabilities.
They may give suggestions on how we can handle situations. They may be able to provide information. I mean, a couple of times we've been able to get information like over a situation that occurred in the community over the weekend. They thought we might get carried over into schools, for example. That's not a role if we're going to charge anybody, but hey, we're giving you a heads up, something could occur, and they might help us think through, what we could do to keep our schools safe. So more of a consult, and that's why they're called a liaison. In a situation when we have, we've had cases that we've looked at of harassment and bullying, and we wondered, is this a hate crime? Then we might just pick up the phone and call. Is this a hate crime, or is this more of a harassment and bullying, just to help us better understand how to process through that as a district? So I would say mainly consult. We did meet with our four police departments just earlier this week, which would be Monday, because it's today only Tuesday. We met with them on Monday and talked to them about, there are times when we have, not often, it's a very unusual circumstance in which we may have a concern of safety at a school. They're willing at that time to actually come in and sit down with our teams and work together to try to, make sure everybody is safe. But again, that would be a very unusual circumstance. I think prior to that time, our law enforcement are also worried about the time, and they want to protect the time of their officers because they're not district employees, right? And so they have told us before they're not going to actually sit on our care assessment teams, and we haven't asked them to, right? But if there is a time where we need more information or really concerned about safety, they may come in and assist us rather than calling and playing phone tag, just so we have a more cohesive response, if that makes sense. But that would be unusual.
Yeah, right. And how many times this year have we activated this protocol?
Well, that's a good question too, Charlie, because I would say we probably have care plans on with students, so that would be in that either serious or very serious, well, more so the very serious categories. Probably less than 20 care plans that we're working with teams, we're monitoring, working with families to make sure they have therapeutic services and the supports they need, or safety plans in place. Less than 20. But how many times have we activated the process? Hopefully, if we start getting really good at this, we will activate this process frequently. Because if there is a fight, we should use the questioning that we have here to make sure that conflict is over. And in those questioning strategies that we utilize with students, while we're evaluating it, one of the questions is what are you going to do next, or what are you going to do now? Now they may say nothing, like it's all over and it's done. Well, then we might actually say, this is a transient threat. Or even with harassment and bullying, what are the plans now? Have we been able to stop this? Maybe we put restorative practices in? Then, we haven't had to go through all these steps down to a care plan, but we've been able to resolve it because we got in front of it. So as our administrators become more comfortable with the process, and if the more, again, with Infinite Campus, that they're inputting the data, then we'll have a better understanding of how many times are we able to get in front of this and resolve conflict before it becomes a bigger issue.
As I recall, one of our agreements, a part of that agreement of the team, this approach, is that the care assessment coordinator was going to make periodic reports to the board about disproportionality and the
Yeah, we had talked about that. I remember that, Charlie, about some data around that, and I think Kate's kind of articulating something that I do think we need to do that. We'll need to come back with some firm data for you around the care assessment piece, and whether it's how many active plans we have, or what we can provide for amount of threats we've got, or something along those lines. But I think what she's articulating, right, is that as folks become familiar with the process, it might be informally a process that works in a lot of different scenarios. So I think for your point, right, we'll still want to be real clear on when is it formally activated, what are the data points around that, making sure that we're not disproportionate in those areas, continuing to look at that component. Because I could also see some concerns based on what Kate just shared, that if we start using it around those processes where we already are disproportionate, what's the outcome there, right? And does it help us get to the point we want to be? But I do think it's a valuable process, and Kate was sure to say that it's separate from discipline, but the discipline could be impacted by the outcome of the care assessment process, right? And I think that was part of the goal, is that we don't just jump to discipline, right? That we want to work this process before we actually move to any kind of a disciplinary consequence around that situation. Yeah. So the easy answer is, we need to come back with some data for you on that.
And the one thing I would say is not something we do to families. This is something we do with families. So as we're going through this process, they might say, okay, no, I really don't want my kid to have a mental health evaluation. No, thank you. I mean, then in those situations, it's hard for us to understand what was that kid thinking and what was their intent. I could say at this time, we've not had any families say, no, thank you, we will not participate. I think they trust the process, they trust UAY. So far, I've not had anybody say they don't want to be a part of that process.
Great. Anything else for Kate right now?
You're welcome.
All right, Laura, restorative practices.
Rolling out sort of circles to 10 buildings that were identified. They're all getting different level of support based on where their schools are. And we're asking that even those schools who aren't getting that, that direct service from the RJ ambassadors or from the equity team, that they do tier 1 restorative practices. Those are like positive interaction, team building, smiling, calling kids by their name, mindfulness, you know, like very basic check-in types of circles or temperature checks. Like that they're doing that to help support social emotional health. And yeah, that's basically what we're doing.
Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about the build out of your team?
Yeah, so the next slide I include the PowerPoint from our October professional development as well as a video. Oh, it's not
Sorry.
Oh, it's there, yeah. As well as the video that Brad, the RJ coordinator, and myself put together to explain those things, like, well, what's the difference between restorative justice, restorative practices? What's the expectation for the, you know, for the staff that's not getting the direct circle training, so on and so forth? Just answers those questions, and in there is an explanation of the teams. So we have the ambassador, equity ambassadors, and we have RJ ambassadors. Those are a team of educators, staff members, who will assist in either professional development for the entire district, and also like a think tank. That's the equity ambassadors, they're a think tank for the district, and then they're gonna put some things on a digital promise platform for micro-credentialing for our teachers and our staff. So they're working on, we just got trained by Digital Promise. They're working on, we have a session planned this week, and we're working on building the courses. There'll be 4 courses for, you know, that'll be around equity that staff can access. On the other side, the RJ ambassadors, thank you, are working on 2 courses for micro-credentialing. And they're also supporting buildings who aren't a part of the 10. So right now, those are our equity ambassadors, those are our RJ ambassadors, and we also have community partners with Becky, who's our consultant, and Annie helps us out. We have Brad, Brian, Chelsea Sims, what's her name? Elizabeth Lilly, Lori Bauer, John Boylin, and Rick. And so one thing that was really cool was when we had the situation at West, we were able to pull Rick and John, and students were able to recognize them as allies, so that they know that there's 2 people at the building, you know, that they can help work through some of the stuff with.
Matt, would you go to, sorry, Laura, would you go
Yeah,
to
one
slide-
thing I want to insert here too, and just brag on now the other Laura, since we talked about Laura Daly's team a little bit, is you know what we got going on here with Laura Gray and her team. So when you think about, you know, in the past what we've had for an equity team in the district, right? I mean, it's not too long ago we could think about it was Kingsley, okay? That was the equity team, right? And so now we look at how we built this out, and this has been with the assistance of some ESSER dollars and some creative thinking, but we really need to have a team of people supporting this work, right? And so, you know, the other thing I'd say, you know, sometimes we criticize central office, it's all administrators. These aren't administrators, right? But these are district folks doing work in the building, just similar to how you heard this behavior team, working directly with our kids, working directly with our adults to try to improve performance. And so there's some folks on there, we're not gonna talk about all their positions tonight, but this is where we talk about trying to increase the capacity of our staff, right, and how that works. And so here's kind of that overview slide of the team that Laura really facilitates. And then you get to those ambassadors, right? These are the people trying to carry some of that good work out into the buildings and some of that message. And then also the focused work around the RJ piece. And many of you know Brad, that leads that work. He's a perfect person for that role and does a great job for us there. So Amy, I don't know where you want me to go, but
No,
Go back
I'll
to the
be
first-
sure to share that.
Can you go back to the first
Laura's
slide?
creative vision about how to build this out and how we've been able to do that together.
And Anna isn't in our department, but she's assisting us with the ambassador work. Neither is Monique or, but Monique and Carmen are fellows this year who have a really strong passion for equity work. They're also doing some kind of leadership stuff and leading professional development amongst the fellows. So their peers are helping to lead, which is really cool. So yeah, that's the team. We got Sharita, who's the equity coordinator, Brad, which is an addition this year. Brad Kelly, RJ coordinator, that's an addition to the team. And then we have Andrea moved up into Sharita's old position as equity specialist, and then Fred is helping us with some with the lead project. He's helping us at the elementary level with some supports there, role models for some of our kids of color.
Thank you, Laura. That's really what I was after. I just wanted to share the build out of the team and the great work that's going on there, and the repurposing of our cultural competency team members to these two groups of ambassadors. Thank you for sharing that. And I would just encourage you, if you have time and opportunity, to go through Laura's presentation that she did in October. There's a video link there. It is an outstanding professional development, and you won't be sorry that you watched it if you have an opportunity.
Agreed.
Yeah,
So
just
good.
this presentation I just opened into there, the blue hyperlink presentation. I can't figure out how to get back to where we need to be on the presentation. It won't open, but I think we're on the last slide there, aren't we? Or am I on the
Yeah,
spot
yeah,
now?
no.
Laura, of the 10 schools that are getting the restorative training, is it all 6 of our secondary schools and then some elementary schools, or what's the breakdown?
It's I can't name all the elementary offhand, but it's out of the secondary, it's Liberty, North Central, and Tate.
Then what's the, I guess, capacity to expand that out?
I think we overdid it. I'll be honest. So we're right now, this is gonna be our litmus test. We are working with them, instead of giving them all the same supports, we're working with them to differentiate what their support looks like. So some of them, depending on where their staff is, because we surveyed their staff too to see what is your level of commitment, because the principal's yes. But then when we got that data back from staff, some of them are just overwhelmed. They're not another thing. And so we want to honor that. We don't want to pull teeth. And so out of that, we're going to create individual plans working with those principals. So some schools might get their teachers might be able to get trained in how to do actual circles. Some, their staff just might meet in circle once a month. They might just experience circles. And some might just want restorative practices. They might want to learn how to do grappling or other ways where they're not in physical circle. And we're just going to support them where they are. And so next year we'll reassess, that some buildings might be able to go further. Right now though, we're supporting buildings that aren't in the 10 on a regular basis. So we're trying to figure out how to manage that part because of the need.
Yeah, I would just back up too and say that our approach changed from the beginning of the year into what we have going on right now. We attempted to take some all-staff PD to the whole group and then to the 10 buildings, and then try to simultaneously provide some administrative support. And we were getting some feedback that there were some positive things coming of that, but there was also some feedback this isn't exactly, landing right, we need something different. So our group took some time in October to kind of revisit what we were doing there. And instead of bringing a small team from each of the 10 buildings, at one point we were thinking about bringing 5 individuals, including the administrators, to restorative circle training. And we really just regrouped in October on what that needed to look like. And instead only brought the administrators. And Warren, Brad, and others did a 2-day circle training with administrators from each of those 10 buildings, which really reset the deck, I think. And now from there, they're developing kind of 3 different paths for each of those 10 buildings to select from. And essentially, it's the amount of hours of PD that you're going to be getting from Laura and her team. Is that all fair to say, Laura? That's where we're at as of today.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about, yes, data with behavior is very important. I would like to erase the negative interactions, period, that a lot of our students have covered. You saw the disproportionality is there, we know that. But think about how many of those never even come to the data, but they're just really negative interactions that didn't need to happen. And so it's the relationship building piece. It's the part about helping staff, the adults, be able to self-regulate when they're triggered so that they don't have to have a negative interaction. It's the negative interactions for me.
Yeah, just speak on that. That's my world, relationships and just how we can systemically sustain this and do it in a way where, because hopefully you get to a point where enough people know it, that that's the dominant model. And then that's what people are seeing is, well, this is just how we interact with kids in our building. And that's, as well, I'm far more interested in this on the front end being proactive, and my belief is that is what is going to change the behavior data, is that we do all that work on the front end to improve the relationships, specifically with our disproportionate kids, with our staff, and because that stuff isn't showing up anywhere in our data. We're not going to see. We're going to see it when they come to the school board meeting and they're frustrated and they're tired, and they finally hit a breaking point, but the day-to-day, very small, maybe even seemingly, sometimes not small, sometimes big, but it's just that daily experience that kids are having where they come up and they're like, fire the racist teachers. And if all we're working as data, we're like, well, is this about disproportionality? But no, it's about the relationship or the lack of a relationship or the nature of that relationship. And what I'm concerned is that we have to sustain the work. Because I know we're paying for this with ESSER dollars, but we have to find a way to make this a sustainable practice, because in all the things I've done as a teacher, back when I was a para at Northwest, it's that relationship between teachers and kids, and primarily not, and well, then that's the next step, is because it isn't just our teachers. We have to get our secretaries trained. We have to get the folks, our custodian, our folks who are daily interacting with families, are some of the folks who need this the most, and we just have no time built out to help those folks on this journey. And it's really, really important, because often that's the first face you see as a family is the person greeting you in the office. So.
And we might want to come back to a calendar conversation, JP, I just think in general, because I think that the takeaway I would also ask you to look at in this situation tonight is those 3 big chunks we just went through, and think about if you're a building principal in our district right now, these 3 huge chunks that we're leading from the district level, and this is just on behavior, guys. Like, we haven't even touched the teaching learning topic tonight, right? About the things we're doing over there too. So there's a lot coming at them, and I think that's also what we're seeing with staff right now, if we're being real, around culture, climate, and morale. It's just heavy, right? And there's a lot of stuff that we're trying to lead, and it's good things. I mean, it's all good work, and it's all things we need to do and that we don't have time to say no to. But I think as we continue the conversation throughout the year, we are going to have to talk a little bit about narrowing the focus on because if we try to do it all, we know we don't do any of it really well. And so that'll be a piece for our team to look at, and then how we try to make sure we don't lose people through good work as we go through this. Because like I said again, this is just the behavior side. That's not teach and learning. That's not any new changes coming from the operation side. Even as a teacher trying to use Infinite Campus, that's just an operational component, let alone all the things we wanted to do with it. So there's a lot there. And I think we need to reflect and just own that a little bit, to know there's a lot there. And if we really want to do things at a high level, and if we really believe relationships are the most important things for them to do, that'll be a filter I know our team's talked about here just in the last couple of weeks we're going to have to get a little better with, and have some conversations with you guys about too. But
you said come back to the calendars, and
and then I could have took a steer, didn't I? Yeah, and I talked about that. Right. So PD time on the calendar, that's another thing. It's just a pressure. You try to do all of these things, again, not even considering academic stuff. There's not enough time in the PD calendar to do that. There's just not enough time. And I just gave a PD day back to the buildings that these guys are all mad at me about. It was supposed to be a district day because of the morale question and the things we were getting from principals and staff, that they just needed some time to work in their building level teams because of all the things we're doing, right? So I do think that's a conversation we're going to have to think about, is if we want our teachers to continue to acquire skills and abilities, we got to give them some more time to be able to work with us, and these guys need the time to be able to train the staff, and that's our only time.
And hopefully the quality of that time, again, early releases seem to not be very efficient way to deliver PD, you know, it's hard to do
Yep,
with,
it's really hard.
to squeeze it.
And with that in mind, I want to circle back to what JP said about making sure that we're including the building secretaries and the custodians. My third grader came home like distraught a couple weeks ago because her custodian transferred buildings. And I didn't really realize like what a strong relationship these kids have with the custodian, but apparently they do. And so I don't know if the time to think about it is when we enter negotiations and bargaining in the spring with those groups and try to build in that, you know, you're gonna attend X amount of PD hours when we negotiate that and make that space for them to do it. I don't know if that's how we do it, but I really think it's important that we do it because those people are an important part of the building culture.
Okay, figure that out, Chase.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard, it's a lot, and piling on just demoralizes folks and they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks, everybody. I guess if there's no more questions, we take a motion to adjourn.
Are we meeting next month? Or are we skipping December? Sorry.
Yeah, skipping December.
Okay.
I guess the board members don't want to make a motion to adjourn.
I'm sorry. A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks, everybody.